Hello, this is Robbie Mitchell here from Head in the Cloud Development. Today I'm going to walk you through creating a very simple blogging app as a demonstration/tutorial of a NetSuite single-page application. We'll be coding in TypeScript, and the IDE we'll be using today is WebStorm. So first, what is a single-page application, or SPA, in NetSuite? Well, I'll give you a hint. I'm not just talking about a fancy suitelet. Let me actually show you in NetSuite, just so we're on the same page. So in NetSuite, you may have noticed that if you go to Customization and Scripting, this single-page applications menu has been here for the past 2 or 3 releases. And this is a whole list of single-page applications. You probably won't have as many as I have, unless you've been dabbling in it quite a bit. But just to show you what we're going to build today, it's going to be something like this. It's really just a dummy blogging app. It supports color-changing themes, logging in as a user, registering as a new user. And once you're logged in, you can create new blog posts, and it shows a very simple list of blog posts here. And you've got a link to view the full blog post, if it's longer than, say, 30 characters or so. So yeah, this is what we'll be creating today. And just to show you a peek at the documentation, if we go in the Help to SuiteScript and the SuiteScript Developer Guide, here we've got a single-page applications page. So here you'll just find some pretty basic information. As you might expect, a single-page application is a web application or a site that loads one HTML page and updates it dynamically as you interact with it. The user interface in single-page applications uses NetSuite's new UIF, or User Interface Framework. And from the hints given at SuiteWorld, my suspicion is that the big NetSuite Next new interface is going to rely on this framework. But again, that's just my personal suspicion. And to see the developer documentation for single-page applications, I've got this in the slide as well, but just to give you a preview here. So this new User Interface Framework catalog is packed full of useful components. And thankfully, to get us started, Oracle gives us a single-page application sample repository here on GitHub. Here there are 6 sample single-page applications that you might find useful. Let me show you what this Item 360 single-page application looks like in WebStorm. Here it is, and as you can see, there's quite a lot here just to make up this one single-page application. Now let me mention my perspective on this, and really who this video is geared towards. I consider myself to be a pretty normal SuiteScript developer, not very familiar with React, in other words. But as you can see here, this single-page application structure is nothing like any normal SuiteScript project. And frankly, when I look at a project like this, I feel a little bit overwhelmed, like I have almost no idea what all these different files are for. So what did I do? Well, I bought 2 books on React and Redux, and I dove in deep. I'm at the point now where I feel like I almost have a sufficient understanding of this, and I could maybe create a single-page application for real, though it would probably still take me some time. So what we're going to do today is talk through the basic steps for how you can go from a Hello World single-page application to a fully functional SPA with state management and dynamic routing. And to be clear, the goal of this project isn't to create a really cool app, but instead to focus on the development process, so that ideally you can apply these same steps to whatever SPA you need to create in real life. Okay, back to the slides. So if you're really starting from scratch, I would really recommend that you watch my SPA 101 tutorial to learn how to create a Hello World single-page application. That's actually going to be the starting point of today's video. Then, more recently, I did a more advanced single-page application tutorial where we created a to-do list. And this one has state management using Redux and is definitely more advanced. We're going to cover a lot of what I did in this video today, plus state management, but this is another good example nonetheless. And so, from a high level, these are the 8 steps we're going to go through in this video. We're going to start with Hello World, a functional single-page application. Then we're going to think about what our UI is going to look like so that we can have some sort of mock-up. Then we're going to replace our hello world with simple placeholders that kind of mimic what our finished product will look like. Then we're going to implement the real components one by one. For data, we're going to start with very simple hard-coded dummy data. We're going to implement state management using Redux. Then we're going to implement dynamic routing. And finally, we're going to replace the dummy data with full connectivity to NetSuite records. So if you're ready, let's get into it. So since I did the previous single-page application video in VS Code, this time we'll be using WebStorm. So the starting point of this video is going to be our Hello World single-page application, which you can find on GitHub here. So I'm just going to download the zip of the code, unzip it, and then we're going to open that in WebStorm. Now if you prefer to start from scratch, most of the boilerplate code comes from the examples here on NetSuite's Oracle Samples repository. So go check them out if you're curious. First of all, if you don't already have it, make sure you install the NetSuite SDF plugin in WebStorm. And when we first open the single-page application here, let's first take a look at package.json. It doesn't matter a whole lot, but let's change the name of it here from HITC test spa to HITC blog test. And we can update the description as well. What matters a little bit more is the NetSuite types version. It should be on at least the version of NetSuite that you're on, so 2025.2, and then whatever the most recent version is. And also, the UIF types has been updated, so you can probably find out whatever the latest version is. It's currently 8.0, and let's use that. Then we can click Run npm install. Now before we do anything else, let's validate our project to make sure that we haven't broken anything yet. And this will also kind of test your account setup. So you're probably familiar with this. You can go to NetSuite, NetSuite settings, and set up your account credentials. And once that's done, you can click Validate here. Okay, it should validate successfully like mine has. So we haven't broken it yet. So now, when we're reusing a single-page application like this, there are a handful of places where we need to update the name. In fact, there are so many that it's almost easier just to start from scratch. But there are different types of lazy, so let's go with this approach. First, we need to update our single-page application XML file. I like to change the ID here first so I can make sure I don't go over 40 characters. I'm just going to call it blog video demo. And then I'm going to rename the object with the same ID. Next, let's look at the manifest. So on line 2, we've got the publisher ID. So if you've got your own, definitely use your own. I'm just going to leave mine there. The project ID, I'm going to call it blog video. And for the project name, call it HITC test blog. And I'm going to use a date stamp because I've got a few of these at this point. Okay, now let's look at the file cabinet here. So you'll see almost the same thing twice. You'll see the file cabinet. Now these are the files that actually get deployed to NetSuite. And below that you'll see Suite Apps, which is kind of our development directory here. So I'm actually going to delete the Suite Apps from the file cabinet because that's the old code that we don't want to be deployed anymore. And this will just help us verify that new code is getting created when we compile it. So now, for this folder, we need to update it to include our new project ID. And potentially your new publisher ID as well. I'm just going to change HITC test spa to blog video. And then back in our XML file for the spa, we need to update these paths as well to match that folder structure. Change the URL as well. Should probably just match our project ID. And the name. Next, let's change this hello world we'll just call it spa in this example. Keep it nice and simple. We'll rename that here as well. Finally, let's change our hello world file to app.tsx. And if it asks you about renaming the function, say yes, and that will change it here as well. Finally, deploy.xml. We need to update the directory here, blog video, and I think that might actually be it. So now let's compile and upload. And if I can teach you one thing here about NetSuite development, it's to do things iteratively. In other words, code a little bit and test often. Don't spend an hour writing code hoping it's going to work, otherwise you're likely to spend even longer trying to figure out what went wrong. Keep your code in a working state at all times so that if one thing goes wrong, you know exactly what it is. So to build this project, we can open our terminal and run npm run bundle. And you should see the file cabinet code get generated, and then we can try to deploy it and see if we forgot anything. Okay, it says it worked. Let's check our single page applications and see if we got one. Yeah, look, 25/12/16, that's today. It says hello world. Great. So far so good. We haven't broken NetSuite yet, but don't worry, we will. So now it's time to change this from a hello world app into a blogging app. So this is where you might need to get out a whiteboard or a sheet of paper, or have some sort of mock-up or another page that kind of looks roughly like what you want to create. I'm lucky that I've already created this one once or twice. So I kind of know we're going to have a title area up here, we're going to have a user bar here, and then we're going to have a list of blog posts. So let's get to it. Let's go to our app.tsx file. So first let's get rid of all this. We're not going to use a content panel or a stack panel or anything like that. What I like to do is just line out some really basic placeholders using headings. So we will use a heading component. And let's just start as simple as we can. Let's just make a div with a heading for NetSuite blog, kind of the title. We're going to have a theme control where you can change the colors. We're going to have the user bar, which is login and registration. When someone's logged in, we're going to have a create post area. And finally, we're going to have the list of blog posts. Okay, let's compile and upload this and see if we're heading in the right direction. I should really learn that keyboard shortcut. Was it Command-Shift-D? We'll find out. Okay, so this is what our placeholders look like. We're definitely going in the right direction. This is great. Let me just go back to my numbered list here. So we've done number 1 and number 2. We've done number 3. Now we're ready for step 4 already. So now we just have to decide which component do we want to create first. Well, we're actually going to start at the bottom, because the post list is something we can easily envision, right? Now before we get into the code, I just want to show you one thing in the documentation. It's something we're going to use. If you've done much in React, you know that using DOM fragments is kind of a common thing. Well, here in UIF we have the VDOM, virtual DOM, and one of its components is a fragment. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot here about it, but basically a VDOM fragment is a virtual DOM structure that allows a component to return multiple child elements without wrapping them in an extra DOM node. So you'll see how we use this here in a minute. So first, to keep our code organized, we're going to create a components folder in our single page application folder here. Then let's create our postlist.tsx file. So we'll start by simply saying export default function postlist. Now obviously we don't have any post data here yet, so let's just start by declaring an empty posts.json array with a to-do to get the data from the app state later on. We'll just fill in some dummy data for the moment. So what is a post? Well, the things we care about are an author. It's just kind of the name of the person who wrote it. It'll have a title, test post 1, and it'll have some content. It is pouring outside, a great day to be working on NetSuite. And it needs to have an ID. Let's create one more. So now what do we do with this? What is a post list? Well, it's basically an array of post components, which we can declare as an array of JSX elements here. Post list. Then we'll iterate through our JSON to populate this array. And now, of course, we need to create our post component alongside this one. Now we could be lazy and create the component in the same file here, but let's keep things tidy and we'll create another post.tsx file here to represent a single blog post. So we've got our functional component here, and it's going to need some props. And now is the time when we need to define what attributes an individual blog post has. So let's create an interface here. We'll say it has an ID, an author, title, and content. And we'll go ahead and export this interface because we know we're definitely going to need to reference it in our post list component as well. And now we can say that props is iPost. So for this component, for now, let's just return a simple div that represents this blog post. Make sense? Okay, then back in our post list, now we can push to our array. Here's where we're going to use vdom.fragment. Almost like a div, but for React. Now we're going to use our post. Now we're going to pass in the JSON from this array, like that. And we'll add in a line break. Actually, no, we'll add in a horizontal line to separate them. And then we just need to return the post list in a div. Okay, simple enough. Now, bubbling up to our main app, let's replace this post list heading with an actual post list. And we can import it. All right, now let's upload and test. All right. That's pretty cool. That works pretty well. It looks really boring though. I think the next thing we should tackle here is adding some colorful theming to the app. So we'll implement this themes control component next. So we're going to add the use state hook at the top of our app to keep track of the theme. If you're new to hooks, they might look a bit like magic until you get to know them. I'll tell you about the book I have later on. So for our theme, we're going to have a primary color and a secondary color. Our default primary color is going to be deep sky blue, and our default secondary color is going to be coral. And to make it easy to reference our themes across the app, let's create a contexts.ts file here. Here we'll import context type from UIF.js core. Then we're going to define a theme context object using contextType.new. And back on our app, we'll import that. And with that, we're going to create a context object, and then we're going to wrap our whole app in a VDOM context tag. Let's move everything into that. Make sure to import VDOM. Now I haven't really taken the time to figure out how to do colors on a NetSuite heading. So for simplicity, we're just going to change this to a regular old H1 and use the style attribute to say color is the theme's primary color. And now, let me tell you, the fact of the matter is I don't actually care about colors. I wanted to show you this because tracking the theme like this is actually a super basic form of state management. Now, if you're not familiar with Redux, you might be tempted to try to use hooks like this to manage your entire app state. According to the NetSuite documentation, you can do something like state context, state dispatch, but actually, don't do this because I tried it and this doesn't work. At least in my testing, single-page applications in NetSuite can only handle super basic context like this. If you try to do something more advanced, it falls apart and doesn't work at all. But it does work fine for simple things like color theming. So we've applied the primary color to the main heading, and later we'll make a dedicated component out of this. And now for the blog posts, we're going to do it properly and pass this to the component. So let's go back to our post component. First let's import our theme context and then the use context hook. Now we can get our secondary color using the theme context. And then we can set it on our title h3 the same way we did on the other component. Okay, pretty straightforward. A little bit like magic, but the pieces do all fit together cleanly. Let's test this quickly. We should see some colors here. All right, yeah. There's some deep sky blue and there's some coral. So that works great for coloring, but what about the theme controller component? Yeah, let's do that now. We'll create a change theme TSX file here in our components directory. And after I show you how this pattern works with passing the state down through the different components, you might actually be thankful that we're going to use Redux for the rest of the app state management. Using hooks for state management can get pretty hairy pretty quickly. So the props that this component is going to receive are the theme and the setTheme method. But what is a theme? Well, let's create an interface here to remind ourselves. It's simply a primary color string and a secondary color string. Now we can use this to clarify our properties here. And remember, visually, this component is going to give users a list of different color themes they can choose from. Now before we go crazy with using hooks to get and set stored themes here, let's start super simple, like we always do, with just a couple of hard-coded themes. We can copy and paste the default theme from app. Let's just add one other one for now. We'll do orchid and medium sea green. So first in our change theme function, let's add a simple function to determine if it's the active theme or not. Next, we're simply going to map our themes array to return a list of them with some text. But similarly to the post list, we need to create an individual theme item component. And now since this one is so simple, we're going to take a little bit of a shortcut and create it in the same file here. So I'm going to make a function theme item. Props are the theme, whether it's active, and a click handler. And in the theme item, let's just return a span that serves as a link to activate the theme when the user clicks on it. We'll make it bold if it's the active theme. Now we'll use our primary color. Here we'll add in the text for the user to click on the primary and secondary colors. Once we have that, we can plug it in here. Crucially, make sure to set the onClick handler to our setTheme function from our props. Now finally, let's plug in our new component to our app and test it out. But WebStorm is telling us we've forgotten our props. So we need to pass in our theme and setTheme. So now let's build and upload. Again, part of what I'm showing you here is that this context management through hooks is a bit hairy, so we're not going to use it any further than this. But this works great. Look at that. But of course, these themes have to be stored somewhere, right? Well, I have a very simple custom record here for blog theme. So what we'll do now is we'll get rid of our hard-coded list of themes and instead read them in from this record type. To facilitate this, we're going to use two hooks, the useState hook and the useEffect hook. The useState hook will track the themes once we read them in. That's kind of interesting. Let's see if that works. Now we need to make a getThemes function here. For this, we need to import the query module. We're basically going to use SuiteQL to look up our theme records. WebStorm is just warning me that I don't have a data source set up. We can ignore that. Define what our results array looks like here. And now we'll map these themes into an array that's the structure we want it in. Now we'll use our setThemes hook here to put this stored themes array into our state. And let's just add a little console log so you can see when this runs. Now, to get this to run when the component loads, we use the useEffect hook, like this. And of course, WebStorm shows us that we haven't used this guy yet, so we'll just replace this here. And we need to do our import. Ugh. This one doesn't always work exactly right. We'll just do it manually. Okay. Other than our data source warning, WebStorm is happy. Quick upload and test. So now we should have 3 themes. Yep. Here they are, and they work great. Okay, so that annoying part is done. Now let's create our next component, the user bar. So in our components list, we'll create a userbar.tsx file. And like always, let's start really simple. We'll just have placeholders for login and register. Again, let's use a VDOM fragment for this. I'll import this. We'll add a to-do here reminding us that we need to show a logout function if a user is logged in. Now let's put this into our app. Quick upload and test. Just to make sure we know where we're going. Thankfully, this thing seems to upload in just a couple of seconds. Yep, okay, we've got placeholders for login and register. Very good. So now we'll go one step deeper and implement our login component. Now, it's worth mentioning that the register and login functionality is purely for demonstration purposes. We're obviously already logged into NetSuite here, and we're not messing with your actual login. This is kind of imagining that this was some kind of standalone blogging app. Just to make sure you know that. So, back in WebStorm, let's go one step deeper, and we'll implement our login component. So let's create a userlogin.tsx file here. And for this, we're going to return a div with a username label and a text box, along with a password label and text box, and a login button. I'll go ahead and import. That's not right. Let's just do this manually. Then we can then we can see what we need here. Why is this not working? Oh, sorry, it's not core, it's components. Okay, now we should get IntelliSense. Yeah, it's just a text box. Name is login username. Oh, it's mad because I forgot to say return. Okay, so there's our username text box, and now we need the same thing for a password. This should match the name. We can set this type to password so that it doesn't show. It'll mask it. Finally, we'll just do an input type equals button, value equals login, on click. Now we need a click handler here. We'll just do a very basic placeholder for now. Do a console log. We'll set this as our click handler. All right, let's add this to our user bar and do a quick test. That looks good. My browser autofills some dummy data. Yours might do the same. Now, of course, none of this actually works yet, and it's time to fix that. Now, if you are what I consider an average NetSuite developer, then state management using Redux may be a totally foreign and possibly scary topic to you. I'm going to show you the documentation here and then take you through it step by step. So in documentation, let's look at state management. And if you want to see more demo after this, check out the 31st minute of my previous single-page application video, where I go deeper into it from the perspective of a to-do list app. Now, I'm not going to read this documentation to you, but we'll actually be able to copy and paste some of the code from here. But at the highest level, there are 4 things that we need to set up. We need actions, reducers, an initial app state, and a store. Now, when you're not totally sure what you're doing, I find that starting with the actions can actually be pretty helpful. In other words, what are the things that can happen in your app? For ours, it's probably pretty self-explanatory. Users can register, log in, log out, and create a post. We should probably also look up the existing posts to show in the list. So to start with, let's create an actions.ts file here in our SPA folder. And there are 2 things we need to do here. First, we need to list all the possible actions. These are the actions that will be fed into a reducer along with the state to create a new app state. So as we mentioned, let's list our 4 identified actions here. I need an equals sign here. This is an object enumeration. Okay, so this is our action type list. The second thing we need here is our action creator functions. Action creator functions handle possible side effects, such as create, read, update, and delete operations, so that the reducer functions can remain pure. We'll need an action creator function for each action listed above. So, for example, our create post function might take in a title and some content. We know that when we hook it up to NetSuite records, this is where we'll create our blog post record. For now, we're just going to do a dummy return. This return is what's going to feed into our reducer to basically report what happened so that it can update the app state with new data. Second, we'll have our fetch posts function here. This will look up all the existing blog posts, but for now, let's just have it return a couple of hard-coded blog post objects. And I'm actually going to take the blog posts from here. We'll fix this in a minute, but for our return, let's just call it posts. Third, our user register function is what will create a new contact in NetSuite. But for now, again, we'll just do a dummy return. And same for our user login function, just a dummy return for now. Okay, now let's start our reducers.ts file here. And as I mentioned, reducers take a state, apply an action, and return a new state. So at the most basic level, might look like this. And crucially, notice that we're not changing the state. Instead, we're returning a new object composed of the old state. Now, before we go any farther, we need to figure out what our app state is actually going to look like here. What information should we be keeping track of, in other words? Let's switch back to our main app file for just a sec. We need to go ahead and declare the initial state right here at the top of the default function. So what should our app state look like? Well, it doesn't need to be complicated. For this, we'll have a string representing the logged in user, and we'll have an array of posts, and an error string. And they'll all be empty when the app starts up initially. And to help us keep track of what the state looks like, let's create an interface for it. We'll go ahead and export this because we know we're going to use it in other places. Let's say that that's what this is. And next, as you've seen before, to help us keep track of our state within the app, we're going to add the useState hook. And just to check back on the documentation, we're actually mirroring what you see here. And now comes the part where we can actually copy and paste the store initialization. We just need to add in the imports for the store. We know these hook imports don't automatically add correctly, so I'm just going to say use memo here. And last but not least, we need to tell the reducer to use is our app reducer, which will get imported. Next, we need to add in a useEffect hook to keep the app state in sync with the Redux store state. Don't ask. Again, I'll add an import for this. Okay, I know that was kind of a lot. Let's do a quick build and upload to see where we're at. Well, our build actually fails right now because we removed our hard-coded posts from our post list. So that makes sense. Let's pause on the state management thing just for a second. We'll just hook up an empty array here. That's fine for now. And I realized that we forgot to create our register component, so let's add that in quickly. I'm actually going to do a save as from my login to create user register. Change this to register. Let's see, handle register. Now, one difference is we actually want to have two password fields so that the user can confirm their password. So we'll have register password and register repeat password. Change the button handler to handle register. Okay, now let's put this in our user bar. All right, now let's see if we can do a quick upload and test. Okay, you notice that we no longer see our post list, and that's expected because we haven't really built out our reducers yet. So let's keep going on state management. First we need to hook up our store to the app. And this is easy peasy. All we need to do here is wrap our entire app in a store.provider component hooked up to our store. Now let's return to our post list, and we'll change it to pull the posts from the app state. So to extract the posts from the state, we have this use selector hook. Let me show you. So this basically says to extract the posts of the app state and use them here. Simple. Now that we know a little bit more about our app state, let's go back and fill in some more of the reducers functionality. For example, we know that our state is an iapp state, so that's what our state will look like here, and it's also what our reducer will return. Second, the pattern for breaking down a reducer looks something like this. Basically, we're going to create individual reducer functions for each component. Go ahead and type some of these out. Don't worry too much about this error string for now. We'll use it later to show the details of when user login fails. So if you notice, for each reducer, we're only passing in a piece of the state that it cares about, and that's what it's returning as well. So for the user, it's the username, and for the post, it's the list of posts. So let's dive deeper into the user reducer now. Again, we'll keep it simple. We know that there are 3 actions we need to handle: login, register, and we actually need to add log out as well. We'll do that in just a sec. import our action type list. I know here I'm using an if structure, but I'll use a switch in the other one. It's always good to have a fallback that just returns the state that was entered. And just while we're here, let's go ahead and add the user logout action. And we can add that here as well. So, when the login action happens, we will have been authenticated by the action creator function. So here we just need to return the username to the app state, just like this. And similarly for the register action, a user would have been created, and again we just need to return the username to the app state. On logout, we just need to return an empty string, because there is no more user logged in. Simple. And let's just talk for a second about the action type passed in here. Specifically, the action type is a symbol. That corresponds to the list of action types here. And we are being a little bit loose with the action types that we pass in. You could definitely tighten this up if you were going to use this for real. But what's important is that we make sure that what we have here matches the output of our action creator functions. So is user what our action creators are returning? No. User register and user login are both returning username. So let's fix that before that causes us any trouble. It's username, not just user. Okay, and for the posts reducer, there are just two actions we need to handle. When the action is create post, we basically need to add the new post into the array of existing posts, like this. Again, noting that the action details will have been passed in from the action creator function. And for the fetch action, our action creator will have looked up all the posts in the system, and we just need to return that list here. Now before we upload and test this beautifully simple code, there's one more little detail. In our app, when the page loads, we need to tell it to load all the posts right away. We can do that here with another useEffect hook. Here we're dispatching the fetch posts action to the store. Now let's upload and test this. Okay, great. It all works as expected so far. Let's keep going. In the components we have so far, we have a lot of placeholders. Let's circle back to our user login component now and hook it up to the app state. To do this, we'll add use state hooks for the component to manage its own field values. And we'll add the use dispatch hook so that it can trigger actions with the main app state. So now we'll hook up these username and password fields to the text boxes. And to make things happen when a user fills in the username and password, we need to add some event handlers. I'm going to show you two ways to do this. For the username, let's create a username event handlers object here. And in it, we'll have each event handler like this. The one we care about is text changed. And we'll use the set username hook with the value. And then we'll set that in the text box with the on attribute. And with the password, the other way to do it is just to set up an individual onTextChanged function like this. And then in the text box down here, we'll say onTextChanged equals that function. And for the login action, we'll ensure that the username and password are set. And if they are, we'll dispatch our user login action. Okay. All right, let's upload and test. Well, nothing breaks, but we can't really tell if it works. In order to find out, what we need to do next is implement the createPost component, because it's only going to show up when a user is logged in. So let's start simple and make a createPost.tsx file in components. And we're going to start really simply with a component that just returns a paragraph telling us to log in. Now let's put this into our app. Do a really quick upload and test just to make sure we didn't break anything. Now let's set the create post component so that we check the user from the main app state, and if they're logged in, we give them some fields to create a new post with. So like before, we'll extract the user from the state with useSelector. And if there's no user, that's where we'll return this paragraph. Otherwise, if they are logged in, then they can create a post. Let's give them some fields to do that. Oh, and it's mad because I didn't wrap this whole thing in a div. Let's do that quickly. Okay. I have a text area for the main content and a submit button at the bottom. Import this component as well. Okay, let's upload and test with our placeholders. This should enable us to really test the login functionality. Well, sort of, because we don't actually have the action creator built, but our dummy data should suffice. So if I have anything in here, I should be able to click login, and then yeah, we get these new components. It looks good. Let's make it work now. So very similar to how we set up the login component, we're going to add use state handlers for our two fields and a use dispatch hook for our app state management. Then we'll set the text values of our two fields from our state hooks here. Then we'll set up two onText change handler functions here as well. And for our input button, we'll set up a handle create function that calls the dispatcher. Now let's upload and test this. Uh-oh, we got a compile error. The compiler says that our create post action only takes 2 parameters, not 3. We need to fix that because the author of the post is actually something we need. Okay, let's retry our build here. And let's upload this. Let's see if we can create posts now. Yep, look at that. Very cool, creating lots of dummy posts in our dummy data array. All right, what are we missing here? We need the ability to log out. Let's add a simple component for that now. So we'll only show this component if the user is logged in. So we want to extract the user from the state, and we've done this enough times to know that we'll do this with the useSelector hook. And we'll have a function for handling logout. Come back to that in a sec. We're going to return a div that just says who we're logged in as. And a button for logging out. And we've done this enough times to know how to hook the button up by now. So let's do that. We'll get our useDispatch hook here. And in our handle logout, we'll dispatch the action. Well, did I not define this yet? Well, that's okay. It's the simplest one, a user logout. All we do is return the action type. There we go. So now let's put this in our user bar. And to find out if the user is logged in, again, we will use the useSelector hook. Should be getting pretty good at this. And if there is a user, basically all we're going to return is the logout component because they don't need to log in or register. Otherwise, we'll return login and register. All right, let's upload and test this. Okay, so now we can log in and log out to our heart's content. And creating a post still works. Everything is coming along smoothly. So that's pretty much it for state management. Now we're going to get into routing. So slightly counterintuitively, routing means navigating between different pages of your single page application. And to keep it simple, we're just going to have two pages. We're going to have a home page, which is basically what we see here, the user bar and the post list. But we're also going to have a drill down page for each individual blog post in case they're really long. So there's a tiny bit of restructuring that we need to do now. Currently, we just have all our components in a div in our app. Well, what we're going to do is move these first four things into a new component that we'll call header bar. So let's create that in a new page folder here in components. Let's try just cutting and pasting these four things. We'll say that we're going to return a div. I'm just going to paste and see what happens. Can import change theme, import our user bar, import create post. We don't need post list. But the props that we're going to have to pass into the header bar are basically the theme and the set theme hook because of how we did that state management. And the current theme. So let's go ahead and import iTheme. And then here we can say props.theme and props.setTheme. Oops, that's not what we wanted. We want iTheme. The color is props.theme.primaryColor. Okay, it's coming along. Oh, we might need to export the interface. Yeah, that's what it is. That's why it didn't let us automatically do it. Okay, now it's pretty happy. So next, let's create a home page component here in our page folder. And homepage is simply going to be our post list for now, to keep it separate from the header bar. And just to keep it clean, I'm going to cut this, paste it here. Fix my typo. And now we should just be able to replace our gap here with header bar. We need to pass in the set theme and the current theme. And then we next want our home page, which is basically our list of blog posts. So now we can get rid of create post, get rid of a few of these imports that are no longer needed, clean things up a little bit. Okay, now let's upload and test. Make sure we have connected things up properly. Okay, now there shouldn't be any visual change. It should work exactly as it had before. Yep, so it looks like we haven't broken anything, so that's good. So next we need to start getting ready to show an individual blog post in its own page. To facilitate that, let's create a post page component in our page folder here. This is really dummy here. Alright, now it's time to actually set up routing. Let me start by showing you the documentation. Under Advanced Guides, you'll find routing. And there's kind of a lot here, but it's not terribly complicated. I will just mention that we're going to do hash-based routing. And we'll keep it very simple. So what we need to do is create a file that specifies the routes of our app. So let's create a blog app route file. And this will have a very simple object called root route. And it's just going to specify 2 page routes. Homepage will be our default route, and post will reference the ID of the blog post, like this. Now let's implement this in our app.tsx file. Step 1 is we're going to wrap everything we have in a router.hash component. Stick everything in there. Import the router. And now one reason we separated the header bar out is it's actually not part of the routing. It's going to stay there regardless of whether the home page is showing or the post page is showing. So we're going to leave that there and put a horizontal line underneath it just to keep it separate. And now here for the routes section, we're going to do router.routes. Get our home page, cut that. We basically need to define each route. So router.route. Path is going to be root route.homepage. Exact equals true. You can read about this in the documentation if you care. Paste our homepage back in and add the import to the root route file that we just created. And then let's just do the same thing for the post page here. Router.route. Path equals root route.post. Exact equals true. And here's just post page. Not too painful, right? Let's do a quick upload and test to make sure we haven't broken anything. Okay, yep, it still works. We can't really get to our post page yet, but that's expected. So how are we going to get to it? Well, we're going to implement a link on the postings here. Back on our post component, let's think about what would happen if the content of the blog post is really long. After all, this is where it would help us to have a link to the full post separately. What we'll do is, we're going to say that if the content is more than 30 characters, we'll shorten it here. We'll take the first 30 characters and add on a ... Put this here. And then right under the content, let's add a link for the route. say view full post. Make sure I do my import. Oh, I think I messed something up here. What is it? Oh, I think I'm missing a curly brace here. There we go. Now I should be able to import the link component. Okay, yeah, let's try this out. Yeah, so we have links to the full posts here. If I click on them, it just says coming soon. We should actually be able to use our browser back button though, since the URL is technically changing, even though it's the same single page app. So what's next? Should we finish this post page? Well, we actually can't do that yet. We're still just using the ID of a dummy post. So let's pause and return to this in a few minutes. All right. If you're a SuiteScript developer, now is the part you've been waiting for. We're going to return to our actions.ts file and start hooking things up to real NetSuite data. Let's do fetch posts here first. Now we're going to need the query module, so let's go ahead and import that. Now let's comment out everything we have here already and remove these to-dos. Now the way we do this might look a little bit weird, but what we're going to do is we're going to return an async method here where we query NetSuite and then dispatch the action type. Let me show you. Query is a little bit longer, but not too bad. I'm going to specify what I want these values to come in as so that they'll match our interface. And this is how we get the name of the owner as author. We're querying from our custom record blog post, which I don't show here, but it is actually included in the GitHub repository. If you download it, I'll mention the URL in the comments. But you can probably see how simple it is. So there's our query. And then to send it to the reducer, we'll say dispatch type action type dot fetch posts and the posts. Let's do a quick upload and test to see if this works. All right, look at that. A bunch of random test posts that I've created over the past few weeks. Great. So what's next? Well, we never really finished our register component, so let's circle back to it briefly. We basically just need to add the state hooks for the 3 fields and set up field change handlers and the dispatch, very much like what we did with login. So to speed things up, let's see if maybe we can copy and paste a couple of things from our user login component. Maybe all this. Yeah, let's just do that. Change that back to register. Set this event handler on the username. Set this on our password text box. And we actually just need a second password hook and handler for password 2. Do that like this. Just copy this. Set these into this field. I need to set the text on these two as well. Now one more thing here. I know I haven't been entirely consistent with this, but one piece of advice I can give you is that as much as possible, try to use UIF components rather than plain HTML. Here, for example, we still just have a regular HTML input button. Let's take a few seconds and just change this to a UIF button. Import this. Instead of onClick, it's action. And with this one cool thing we can do is make it so that it's only enabled if all the fields are filled out and the 2 passwords match. Okay, that's better. I think it's a good long-term choice to make as much as possible. Okay, now let's get back to actions and implement the register action. For this we'll need the record module, so let's import that. Again, let's comment out what we have. And very similar, we'll return an async function that creates the contact record and then dispatches the user register event for the reducer. All right, time for a quick upload and test. Let's find out if we can register as a new user. I'll make sure to type in the register fields, not the login fields. My browser's going to hate how simple this password is, but I'm just using the word test. If I click register, I think it should log me in. Yeah. Well, some sort of user feedback there might be helpful, but it looks like it did work. And if I go into NetSuite and check my list of contacts, let's find out if it created one. Yeah. So this is my new contact. And on my custom tab, there's my super secure blog password. Nobody will ever guess that one. Okay, so registering works. Now let's implement login. So for this, again, we're going to return an async function. And here we'll do a query to find the contact with a matching name and password. So if there are any results, we'll dispatch with the username. Otherwise, basically have to dispatch with an empty username. And we'll upload and test this. Let's see if I can log in as the user I just created. I got an error. Looks like I did a typo. Sorry about that. Cust entity. Try that again. Okay, so now if I click login, yeah. But what if I get it wrong? What if I just type in some craziness here? It doesn't really work. Shouldn't we have some sort of message letting the user know? Yeah, of course we should. And that's where that error property on the state comes in handy. Remember this in our reducer? Well, it's time to fill this in. So let's add in an error reducer. Part of the state passed in is just a string, action, type, symbol. There will be an error string passed in as well. Now I need to add a new action tag for this. So back in actions, let's add a user error there. Sorry, let's make it login error. Yeah. So if there is a login error, we will just return action.error. We'll use this here. Now we need to add this new login error action creator. So let's do that. But just a second, when does this action get triggered? After all, there isn't any point in the app where a user is going to intentionally call a login error, is there? No, of course not. Logically, it's part of our login action creator. If the login fails, we'll dispatch this to the reducer, letting it know. So instead of a blank username, we'll dispatch login error. we'll say error invalid username or password. And also, if the login is successful, we'll want to clear that error in case there were any previous failed login attempts. But before we upload, we need to display this error message in our login component. So under our other hooks, we'll add a useSelector call to get any login error. And then we'll just show it under the login button. Color red. And notice here's another HTML input button we should replace, but I'll leave that for you to do. Let's upload and try this out. Now if I type in some garbage, I see my login error. If I type in a successful password, it works and the error goes away. Great. That's all wonderful. Now finally, back to actions.ts for our final action creator, the create post function. This is going to be kind of similar to creating our contact. Here I'll use the promise, then, and catch methods instead of await and async, just to show you a different way of doing it. And just to note, we're not actually going to set the author, since a contact can't be the owner of a custom record. If you wanted to make this a bit more robust, you could just add a contact field to the blog record, but I'm not going to worry about that. So if the record is created, we'll dispatch our create post action. Along with the ID, title, content, and author. If there's any error, we will alert the user about that. And I suspect there may be a UIF-friendly way of alerting, but I haven't discovered it yet. Haven't really looked, to be honest, but it's fine. Regular alerts work okay. All right, let's try this. Let's create a simple blog post. Okay, it's added it to my list. If I wanted to make the functionality a bit more robust, I could clear the fields after creating it, but not too worried about that. Now, to verify that it really created it, let's just refresh this page. And yeah, there's my new posting. You can see in the URL, if I click on it, it gives me the record ID. So now we can finally get back to finishing this. So back to our post page. So how should we do this? Well, from the URL, we know that in our props, we'll have the ID as a string. And we need to get the rest of the details about this blog post. We probably could pass all the values in as props. This might work since there are so little values here. But if this was some big complicated record, it might be a better idea just to pass in the ID like we have here, and let this component handle getting the rest of the data itself. Yeah, let's do that. We're going to add a call to the useState hook to check the current post. And to get the full details of the blog post record, we'll implement a getPost function here that queries NetSuite for the full set of values. I need to import query. Then we're going to use the useEffect hook like we did in the main app to trigger this lookup. Finally, what we're going to show is a go back link along with the post object and a horizontal line. I'm sorry, I did this slightly wrong. When we do setPost, we need to keep the ID separate from the rest of the attributes. And then pass in the data like this. Yeah. And then down here, you need to say if there's post and it has data, and use the data here. Okay. That should be better. Let's try it out. So basically, it works, but there's one problem. Currently, our post page component is always showing the shortened version of the content. This is simple to fix. Let's go back to our post component. And let's add an optional short parameter to our post interface. Then if we're doing the short version, that's where we'll do this trimming. Otherwise, we'll show the full content. That also means we need to extract this link and put it in a variable here. So I'm going to say let link to full content. This is a JSX element. Initialize it to null. Then we'll say if props.short link to full content equals the div that we had. And let's just put this here. Okay. That's good. Now we just need to say in our post list, here in the list, we do want short to be true. Okay, now let's go for our final upload and test. Okay, so back on our home page, our list still shows the shortened version, and if we click View Full Post, we see the full version, and we don't have a link to drill down, but we do have a go back link. So that is it. It is fully functional now. And that works wonderfully. Well, that was a lot. I hope you understand now how much fun and powerful single-page applications can be in NetSuite. And coming full circle, this is what we just finished doing. We set up our UI, implemented all the components, started with dummy data, implemented state management, implemented routing, and then hooked up the real NetSuite records. If you want to learn more about single-page applications, React hooks, or Redux, here are the resources. This is the URL to the UIF framework. Just replace the question marks here with your NetSuite account. For Redux, this is the book that I went through, and for React hooks, this is another book by Daniel Bugle. Thank you very much. And this blogging app itself was one of the examples here in one of the books. With that, this concludes our tutorial on creating single-page applications in TypeScript. Please get in touch if you have any questions or feedback, or if you'd like to hire us to build a single-page applications for you. Otherwise, we'll see you at Sweet World. Thank you for watching.